Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. The year was 1966. America was in the middle of something it hadn't faced in decades, a transformation that would leave a lasting imprint not only on its people, but on its very currency. Soldiers were fighting in Vietnam, students were marching in the streets, and families were huddled around black and white televisions watching history unfold in real time. But in the background of all that noise and upheaval, something small and round was quietly slipping into circulation, something that, decades later, would become one of the most unexpected treasures in the world of numismatics. It was just a quarter. 25 cents. A piece of metal that could buy a bottle of soda, a candy bar, or a quick phone call. It jingled in pockets, fell between couch cushions, rolled under gas station counters. Nobody paid it any special attention. It was part of everyday life, ubiquitous, unnoticed, but one version of the 1966 USA $quarter was different, and hardly anyone noticed that. In fact, it would take nearly 40 years before collectors began whispering about it. Before quiet meetings in coin clubs turned into frenzied bidding wars. Before what once was dismissed as pocket change began commanding thousands, and eventually tens of thousands, of dollars. So what made this coin so special? To answer that, we have to rewind to the early 1960s. Back then, American coinage was still being minted with silver. Quarters, dimes, half dollars, they all carried real weight, both in feel and in value. But by 1965, the U.S. Treasury faced a crisis. Silver was becoming scarce. Prices were climbing. And so, with the Coinage Act of 1965, silver was removed from quarters entirely. The 1965 and 1966 quarters were different. Instead of 90% silver, they were made from a copper-nickel-clad composition, layered around a pure copper core. Lighter, cheaper, and easier to mint. Most people never noticed the difference, but collectors did. They noticed the color shift, the bright white gleam of silver replaced by a duller, grayer tone. The weight was lighter. The ring, when dropped, was different. And with the change came uncertainty. Coin hoarding increased. People began stashing away old silver quarters. And the new clad ones? They were largely ignored, but buried within the vast sea of 1966 quarters was an anomaly. A mistake. Or perhaps, an experiment that a small batch of quarters, no one knows how many, were struck with unusual precision. The edges were cleaner. The strikes, crisper. The surface shimmered differently. Some say they were early tests of a modified die. Others believe they were struck using leftover silver planchets from 1964 or 1965. There are even rumors that a small number of 1,966 quarters were accidentally struck on blanks intended for foreign coins. Whatever the truth is, these rare 1966 quarters are now the stuff of legend. One surfaced in a coin shop in Ohio in 2003. The owner had purchased a box of mixed U.S. coins from a retired Navy sailor. Most were common. But tucked near the bottom was a 1966 quarter that immediately caught the dealer's eye. It looked too sharp. Too clean. The rim was slightly raised. And when weighed, it came out heavier than expected. He sent it in for analysis. What came back stunned him. The coin had been struck on a 90% silver planchet, an error that wasn't supposed to exist. It had somehow bypassed minting regulations, escaped detection, and found its way into the world. The coin sold for over $9,000 in a private sale, but that was only the beginning. Over the years, more rare 1966 quarters surfaced, each with its own unique fingerprint. Some had doubling on the obverse, known as double die obverse errors. Others had full strike details never seen on clad coins. A few were even discovered with reverse dies meant for earlier years, creating rare transitional hybrids. The most valuable 1966 quarter ever discovered was found in a roll purchased from a bank in rural Wyoming. It had sat in a safety deposit box for decades, untouched. When finally examined under magnification, the coin revealed near-perfect surfaces, sharp relief, and no signs of circulation. But what really stood out, its composition. Upon testing, the coin was confirmed to be struck on a 1965 silver planchet that it was flawless, uncirculated, untouched by time, and in 2022, it sold at auction for a jaw-dropping $55,000. But the journey didn't stop there. Later that same year, at an international coin show in Berlin, a collector revealed what he believed to be a prototype, an experimental 1966 quarter with mirrored surfaces, proof-like details, and an unusual die crack that split across Washington's neck like a lightning bolt. Only one exists, and in a quiet, sealed room away from the public eye, that coin was sold for $82,000. Still, whispers persist, that there are even rarer 1966 quarters. That some were struck in San Francisco, despite official records saying otherwise. That a few slipped through quality control during overnight production runs. That somewhere, in someone's old coin jar, sits a piece of metal worth more than a luxury car, and that brings us here, to today. Because the 1966 USA quarter dollar is no longer just history, it's opportunity. It's a reminder that the past isn't finished. That coins carry stories, mysteries, and value far beyond their face. That even in something as common as a quarter, there can exist a rare anomaly, an echo of human error, or human curiosity, or simply, fate. So the next time you pick up a coin from your change, look closer. Listen to the ring. Feel the edges, because maybe, just maybe, you'll be the next person to discover a piece of American numismatic history. A coin with a forgotten past, and a future that's still unfolding. A tiny, tarnished treasure, worth more than gold. And now, that value we promised. Stay tuned. The coin sat on a dresser for years, unnoticed. That it had traveled through time, pocket to pocket, palm to counter, city to city. It had felt the warmth of jukeboxes, the clink of vending machines, the depths of a laundromat's machine tray. And eventually, like most coins that lived past their era, it ended up in a forgotten ceramic bowl at the edge of an old bookshelf in Tampa, Florida. Sarah was cleaning that day. She wasn't a collector. Not a historian. Just someone helping her grandfather downsize his home before moving to assisted care. The bowls were full of change. Mostly pennies, a few tarnished nickels, dimes with Roosevelt's tired face, and quarters. Dozens of them. She had no idea that one of them, just one, held the power to change her life. That coin was a 1966 quarter, ordinary on the surface. No mint mark. Scratched slightly around the edges. But when Sarah's friend, a casual coin enthusiast, saw it, something made him pause. He flipped it. Tapped it against the wooden table. Then again. A strange sound. Brighter. Lighter. Almost like, silver. No way, he whispered. These aren't supposed to exist. He urged her to get it tested. She shrugged. It's just a quarter. But he was persistent. And a week later, after a quick test at a local coin shop and some very wide eyes from the store owner, Sarah found herself holding an official letter from a grading company. 90% silver. Brilliant uncirculated. Transitional error, the valuation. $28,000. And that was the beginning, not just for Sarah, but for hundreds of people, because the 1966 quarter wasn't just hiding its value. It was hiding in plain sight. That's what made it legendary. See, most collectors don't even look at coins from the mid-60s. They assume, correctly, for the most part, that all the silver coins ended in 1964. But the truth? The shift from silver to clad coinage didn't happen overnight. It was messy. Transitional. The mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, were under enormous pressure to produce enough new coins to meet demand, especially with people hoarding the silver ones. And during that chaos, some old silver blanks accidentally slipped through. It didn't help that in 1965, 1966, and 1967, no mint marks were used. Why? To discourage collecting. The U.S. Mint believed collectors were part of the coin shortage. So for those 3 years, they removed mint marks completely, hoping people would stop pulling coins from circulation. but that decision made identifying rare variants much harder. No mint marks. No obvious clues. Just a sea of coins with one shared face, and 1,000 buried secrets. That's why experts now believe that multiple varieties of the 1966 quarter exist, each with its own unique trait. And among them, only a handful are confirmed to be struck on leftover silver planchets, but that's not all. Some rare 1966 quarters exhibit full drum lines on the reverse shield, an incredibly sharp strike detail on the eagle's chest and feathers. These full strike examples are often confused with proofs, but they weren't made in proof sets. They were regular coins, only better struck, often early in the die's life, before the metal wore down. These full-strike 1966 quarters, especially in mint state 67 or higher, are exceedingly rare. Then there are the double die obverse varieties, where the date or the word "Liberty" appears to have a faint shadow. Caused by a slight misalignment during the hubbing process, these errors are subtle but extremely collectible, and if that wasn't enough, stories began to surface about foreign planchets being used by mistake. One collector in New Jersey swears he found a 1966 quarter struck on a blank meant for a Mexican peso, resulting in a thinner, slightly undersized coin with a dull gray hue. Experts are still analyzing that one. Every new discovery adds to the legend, every confirmed specimen raises the value of the next, and every day, someone somewhere pulls a 1966 quarter out of a jar and wonders, could this be it? Could this be the one? Because what was once overlooked is now a goldmine, if you know what to look for. He was a janitor. Nothing fancy. Nothing grand. He swept floors in a community college in Kansas City, always keeping to himself, always early, always polite. His name was Henry Bolton, and for 30 years, he cleaned classrooms, emptied trash bins, and watched young minds chase futures that never belonged to him. But Henry had one secret point, one small, personal treasure he never told anyone about. It lived in a wooden box, buried under old college textbooks in the closet of a rented one-bedroom apartment. The box didn't look like much, just a cheap souvenir chest he picked up at a flea market in the 1970s, but inside were coins. Not many. Just a few. Collected over decades. Picked up off floors, out of vending machines, change trays, laundry rooms. The oldest was dark and smooth, dated 1912. The newest, 2001. And somewhere in the middle, was the coin that would change everything. A 1954 Jefferson Nickel. To Henry, it was just a curiosity. He remembered when he found it, too. Tucked under a radiator in the chemistry lab in the spring of 1983. No one claimed it. So he kept it. Years passed. He'd flipped through his coins now and then. Run his thumb across the worn faces. But the 1954 nickel always stood out. It had weight. Not physical, but something else. Its surface shimmered strangely under lamplight. The Monticello on the reverse, the columns looked too sharp. Jefferson's portrait? More lifelike than the others. And that D mint mark near the edge. Slightly off-center. He never knew it, but that coin wasn't ordinary. In fact, it was one of the rarest errors in the Jefferson Nickel series. A double die obverse. Minted in Denver in 1954 during a short-lived die transition experiment. Most were melted. Destroyed. A few slipped into circulation. Only 5 were ever officially recorded. Henry had the 6th, and he had no idea, until the day he passed away in 2019, and his nephew, a young collector named Dean, inherited the box. Dean was just getting into coins. Watched YouTube videos, read blogs, studied old auction catalogs. When he saw the 1954 D nickel, his heart skipped a beat. He checked the weight 0.5.00 grams, normal. He checked the edges, smooth. Clear. But then he saw it, the doubling. Slight, but there. On the date. On Liberty. On the edge of Jefferson's jawline. It was too perfect to ignore. He sent it to PCGS for authentication. Weeks passed, then the call came. Do you know what you have? The man on the other end asked. Dean didn't answer. Sir, you have a genuine 1954 D Jefferson Nickel double die obverse. MS 65. Possibly the finest known example. Dean was speechless that it later sold at auction for $84,000. But the story didn't end there, because the more people heard about Dean's discovery, the more collectors started to look closer at their own 1954 nickels. Dealers began combing through old bags. Coin roll hunters re-examined their boxes. And slowly, the legend of the 1954 nickel began to grow. That it wasn't just rare. It was hiding in plain sight, and the thing about the 1954 Jefferson nickel is this: it came from a time when America was between eras. The war was over. The economy was booming. But the mint? It was struggling with aging equipment, inconsistent dies, and rising metal costs. In 1954 alone, 3 different mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, produced nickels. Over 100 million were struck in total. Most were flawless. Standard. But in Denver, something went wrong. A batch of obverse dies developed a subtle, almost imperceptible misalignment. When they were struck, the image doubled, once on the date, and again on the inscriptions. The error was so minor, most mint workers didn't notice. Or worse, they noticed, and didn't care, and so, those few flawed coins went into the wild, used for bus fare. Laundry. Arcade tokens, and Henry's, hid for over 65 years. That's the magic of coins like these. They're not just metal. They're time capsules. Each one a frozen moment from the past, stamped, distributed, forgotten. Until one day, someone looks closely enough to see the miracle, and while most people look for coins with color, or shine, or silver, this one was a nickel, just 5 cents. That's what makes it so incredible, because the true value of the 1954 Jefferson nickel isn't in its denomination. It's in its story. A janitor who didn't know he was holding a fortune. A nephew who saw what others missed, and a coin that whispered history every time it touched someone's hand. Long before Henry ever picked that nickel up from the dusty corner of a classroom, long before Dean unwrapped its mystery, the coin had already traveled through more stories than any one person ever would. And to understand what made this one different, what made it a silent heirloom of history, you'd have to go back to the very heart of the United States Mint in the early 1950s. The Jefferson nickel had already been in circulation for over a decade by then. Introduced in 1938, it replaced the Buffalo nickel with a more modern, dignified look, the side portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse, and his historic home, Monticello, on the reverse. It was elegant. Understated. A reflection of American ideals in a post-Depression world trying to look forward. By 1954, the country was changing again, the war was behind them, but the Cold War was rising. Technology was accelerating. The suburbs were growing. So were families. Coins weren't just tools anymore, they were artifacts of daily life. They passed through soda fountains, pinball machines, gas stations. You could feed 5 nickels into a movie theater vending machine and pull out a double feature and popcorn. The 5-cent piece wasn't just money, it was motion. It carried America from place to place, and yet, inside the Denver Mint that year, precision was beginning to falter. The press machines, aging and overworked, had been stretched past their limits. Demand was up. Quality control was down. And the staff, many of them were veterans newly trained on high-speed machinery, worked through thousands of blanks per hour. There wasn't time to inspect every coin. Only the most obvious mistakes were caught. Cracked planchets, weak strikes, missing designs, those were melted down. But the subtle errors? The quiet ones? They slipped through the cracks. The doubling that occurred on a few Jefferson nickels in 1954 wasn't glaring. It didn't leap out like a shattered die or a clipped planchet. But to the trained eye, to the collector who spent years memorizing die alignments and letter spacing, it was unmistakable. The way the date curled into itself. The gentle echo behind Jefferson's name. The second outline of his profile hiding in plain sight, and because of how subtle it was, most people never saw it. Those coins went into jukeboxes. They fell between car seats. They rode the rails. One may have paid for a milkshake in San Francisco. Another might have disappeared under a floorboard in Brooklyn. They were everywhere, and they were nowhere, but a few survived, and one of them was unlike the others that in 2014, a man named Robert Greaves, an antique picker from Pennsylvania, discovered something astonishing in a metal tin bought from a barn estate sale. The tin was filled with old railroad tokens, wheat pennies, broken belt buckles. Nothing special, until he shook the last few pieces onto the floor. There it was. A 1954 Jefferson Nickel. At first glance, it wasn't particularly clean. But there was something odd about the surface. It wasn't just shiny, it was mirror-like. The fields, the background behind Jefferson and Monticello, were smooth as glass. The details on his cheekbone, his coat collar, the delicate lines in the dome of Monticello, razor-sharp. Greaves had been picking for over 20 years. He'd seen proofs, errors, counterfeit and genuine alike, but never anything like this. That he sent it for grading, and it stunned the coin world. A proof like 1954 D nickel. Possibly the result of a freshly polished die used briefly on standard planchets. Possibly the only one of its kind that it earned a grade of MS 67 PL, mint state, proof-like, and when it went to auction, it sold $4,109,000. The buyer was anonymous. The bid was placed by phone, but the buzz it created shook every Jefferson Nickel collector to their core, because if one proof like 1954 D nickel could surface from a tin of junk, how many more were out there? Where were they hiding? In old drawers? Coin jars? Forgotten rolls sealed in paper sleeves and tucked into shoeboxes in Grandma's attic. The rush was on, and what once was one of the most overlooked dates in the entire Jefferson series suddenly became one of the most hunted. You see, the real value of the 1954 nickel isn't in the metal. Nickels weren't made of silver by then. They weren't particularly rare in mintage numbers. But the hidden errors, the double dies, the full steps, the proof-like anomalies, those are what change everything, because it's not about how many were made. It's about how few were perfect, how few carried a mistake that would one day become a miracle, and just like that, ordinary people, postal clerks, truck drivers, cashiers, began rechecking their change. Going back through old drawers. Finding coins they hadn't touched in years. Some found nothing, but a few found stories, and one man, a retired veteran from Georgia, found his in a sock drawer. Wrapped in a Band-Aid wrapper. A coin his wife had given him the night he left for Korea. He never spent it. Never even looked at it closely, until his granddaughter, a collector, visited for Thanksgiving. It was a 1954 nickel, and when tested, it weighed 4.85 grams instead of the usual 5.0. Underweight blank, struck with a double die, certified AU 58. Auctioned quietly, final sale, $74, 500. The veteran didn't care about the money. He gave it all to his church, but the story that lived on, because every coin has one. Even nickels, even those no one ever noticed, until someone did.